Today is day 30 of the Karen Reed trial. I'm going to give you my daily recap. Today is the final day of testimony. The defense rested their case, and I personally listened to every single minute of each witness for the Commonwealth and for the defense. The first witness that they called today is Dr. Sheridan, and he is very well experienced. No need to go over his credentials. He graduated from med school in the 70s, and he just has so much continuing education. He estimates that he's done between 12,000 to 13,000 autopsies. He said that he has performed about 1,000 autopsies with physical altercations, and about 200 of them were involved with blunt force trauma. He also says that he has experience doing autopsies where there's been an animal attack, specifically a dog attack as well. His findings are that John O'Keefe's injuries, specifically to the arm area, are not consistent with being hit with a 7,000-pound vehicle. He says there is a lack of bruising and fractures. And based on his experience, his injuries could be consistent with a fight or an altercation. Just to be very clear, the state's medical examiner said that her findings were not consistent with a fight, and they were not consistent with an automobile accident either. So just wanted to clear that up for everyone. He does bring up the defensive wounds that are on the back of John O'Keefe's hands, and he says he could have been using them, his hands, for defense, and that's where the bruising could have been from, but we've also heard that it could have been from the IV too. All of the defense questioning by Liza Little is very concise and to the point. I'm really glad that she did this questioning. Once we get into the cross-examination by Adam Lally, there's a lot more that comes out. He says that the animal bites were contained to one part of the body, specifically the posterior of the arm. And Adam Lally asks, were you aware that there was a dog at 34 Fairview? And in the reports, he says, yes, he became aware of that. Were you aware that the dog was involved with a bite with another dog and then bit a human a few months later? And he says, no, he wasn't aware of that. Adam Lally asks if he had seen pictures of that dog and those dog bites, because apparently there are pictures of that, and he says no. Something that's brought up a few times today is the microscopic pieces of plastic that were on John O'Keefe's clothing, supposedly from being impacted by the taillight. And the problem that I have with this evidence is that the state troopers are the ones who collected it from the shirt and then turned the pieces over to the lab. Whereas I would have liked to see the whole shirt turned over to the lab and the lab techs be the ones to say, yes, there was plastic in that shirt. I don't know if we really know if it was in the shirt, if we're trusting Trooper Proctor and Buchanan. So that's just what I have to say about that. Adam Lally asks if he was told about John O'Keefe's DNA being on the car, and he says, I think I asked about it and I was told no. Asked about a hair sample on the rear of the car, and he said no, he didn't know about that. And he reiterates again with Adam Lally that he would expect bruising when there's contact with a vehicle, and there wasn't any bruising in the arm or rib area. The defense's next witness has been named the car crash daddy. His name is Dr. Wolf, and he is an accident reconstructionist for ARCA. And we heard his testimony about his expertise last week, and he's extremely qualified. And Alan Jackson is going to do his questioning. Alan Jackson loves to hammer the fact in that he was not hired by the defense. He was also not hired by the Commonwealth. He was hired and paid by a third-party company. This information was given to the Commonwealth and to the defense, and the defense is the only one who chose to call him to the stand. Dr. Wolf is going to be talking about the damage to Karen Reed's Lexus 570 or whatever it's called. And then the other accident reconstructionist is going to be talking about John O'Keefe's injuries next. We kind of get right into it with this witness, which is great. Alan Jackson wants to know if the force of a pedestrian versus vehicle can cause damage to metal of the car and to the bumper. And he states that the bumper is actually just like kind of clipped onto the car. So he says that yes, that could happen with hitting a pedestrian. Alan Jackson wants to know, was there any damage to the Lexus that appeared consistent with any kind of pedestrian interaction that you saw? And he says, no, it was strictly confined to the taillight, not what you'd expect for a typical pedestrian interaction. He noted 2 glass fragments that were on the bumper cover, and pictures of that was provided to them. He gets all smiley and giggly and nerdy and very excited when Alan Jackson brings up the fact of how did you reconstruct this accident? And they built a cannon that was going to shoot a drinking glass at the taillight to see at what speed and velocity that would need to be to crack the taillight exactly the way it was cracked, like Karen Reed's taillight. And they started doing this because of the glass fragments that were found at the crime scene, along with the drinking straw. They used a rock style glass, which is like a shorter one for like whiskey drinks, but I'm not really sure if that's the kind of glass that John O'Keefe left the bar with either. So due to all their research and everything, they ended up shooting this glass at the taillight between 30 to 40 miles per hour. He said this is the estimated rate of speed that an adult male would have thrown the drinking glass at the car. And this is the first time I've heard any kind of evidence about a glass being thrown at the car. But if it's the theory, okay, maybe they were having an altercation and that's how the taillights cracked. But that doesn't really explain how John O'Keefe ended up with all of the injuries. So he doesn't think that this is how John O'Keefe sustained his injuries either. He says, we wanted to have an understanding when a drinking glass hits the taillight, what would happen. So they also did this type of demonstration with a replica head, and we'll get into that in a second. So the speed that they actually were able to achieve while throwing the glass was at 31 miles per hour and 37 miles per hour. There was damage at 37 miles per hour that was consistent with how this could have happened. They didn't do any testing of somebody holding a glass and being hit with the vehicle that was consistent with the injuries to the arm. And we get into the dummy test next. So basically they're dropping the dummy head kind of like on the taillight to see the force that would have to crack that taillight. And he said from 7.5 feet with the dummy head at 15 miles per hour with the vehicle moving. At 15 miles per hour, it did more damage than the damage on Karen Reed's car. So even though the Commonwealth is stating that her car was backing up at 24 miles per hour, he says that there would have been significant, I think it's 2 times more energy, and that would have done 2 times more damage to Karen Reed's taillight. So he's estimating that to achieve that crack on the taillight, it would have had to been at 15 miles per hour. So on Karen Reed's SUV, there's a tiny little dent and scratch here. And he said that there was no damage between the dents and the chipped paint there to the taillight. He would have expected if an arm was hit there, that he would have seen more damage in between that area as well. At the end, Alan Jackson asks, in your expert opinion, is this consistent with striking a human head? And he says no. Is this consistent with the taillight striking a human arm? And he says no. Something that we've seen with a lot of really likable witnesses on the stand is either the defense, Alan Jackson or Yannetti, or Adam Lally goes after them. And I don't think the jury likes it a lot. He was a very likable witness on the stand, and Adam Lally was kind of getting irritating with his cross-examination. He was asking a lot of questions that were a bit ridiculous, but he wanted to know exactly which photos he observed, if he knew that there was wind, because it was blizzard conditions, and he says he doesn't care what the wind was. That doesn't change any of his theories. Adam Lally wants to know where on the taillight they were shooting at, and he says they used the specific fracture patterns on the taillight to find the exact point of impact. I don't think Lally really expected him to have that answer, but his cross-exam was kind of flat for me, and I'll go to part 2 for the next witness.